We are now recording. And it's that time of year where we get our favorite climatologists on to tell us what our outlook looks like for the climate and drought. And then he is going to start out with a announcement. Kyle, we have lots of new faces on today, so if you'll just kind of give a short intro of yourself, I think that would be awesome.
I'd be happy to. Thank you all for being here today. It is a real honor to be able to give a climate and drought update to this group. My name is Kyle Bocinsky. I am the Director of Climate Extension for the Montana Climate Office. We're based out of the College of Forestry and Conservation at the University of Montana. Although I'm wearing a Notre Dame shirt today, which was like poor form, but that's where we're at. Today, I'm going to be giving a Western drought update, but first, I got a request from Abby Hall. Many of you may know Abby. I'm going to share my screen real quick to briefly provide an update on this program. Are people seeing my screen? Yeah. So Abby Hall is, I think her title is the director of tribal programs for the EPA. The EPA has two major programs going on right now that all tribes across the country are eligible for. One is called the Community Change Grant. This is $2 billion of disaster planning assistance, resilience projects that focus on new or expanded green infrastructure and retrofits of existing community infrastructure and open spaces. And this is really to address established impacts from heat islands, extreme heat, wildfire and smoke, floods, storms, and other climate impacts like drought, which we'll be talking about today. These projects are often a pretty heavy lift to get the design work in, get it submitted to the EPA, and then receive that funding. And so the EPA has also launched a program to provide direct technical assistance, a design assistance program with community engagement and partnership development that can lead to a successful application or lead to an application to the Community Change Grant Funding Program. The EPA is awarding 50 of these projects to, it's called the Equitable Resilience Technical Assistance Program. They're awarding 50 of these projects to eligible communities that are in need of this direct technical assistance. Now, Abby reached out to me because she told me that no communities in Region 8, that's the Missouri River Basin region, no communities in that region, and maybe it's just no tribal communities, but no communities in that region have applied yet for this direct technical assistance. And the DTA program, 50 of these communities they're able to serve is pretty undersubscribed at this point. It's just running this year. So I would really like to see communities represented on this call receive this assistance. What it lines up as is just a quick initial call to identify community assets that are vulnerable to climate change impacts, a one-day site visit to conduct a site assessment and confirm 1 to 3 sites that will receive design work. These can be everything from thinking about retrofits for solar installations to water treatment facilities, to one of the ones that I participated in, which is actually taking an old dump on the side of the Missouri River and turning it into an eco-tourism facility. There will be 6 weeks of design and community engagement work, a one-day on-site design workshop, and a final set of design options with a preliminary budget and project summary, sort of the core of what that application actually looks like for the Community Change Grant Program. The types of projects, I just gave you a couple, but these can be community serving buildings, think cooling centers, or disaster resilience centers, public parks or open space, transportation and mobility options, and any other project types that are outlined in the notice of federal assistance. I'll send out this this slide deck because it is really helpful. But this tells you a bit about what you have to do. I actually looked through the application early today. It is a light lift for this direct technical assistance program. You have to signal your intent and your eligibility of your community. All tribes are eligible to apply for the community change grant. Your agreement to host EPA contractors for site visits. You do have to suggest 1 to 3 project location, and you have to demonstrate disaster-prone status. There's a great application called the CMRA, the camera application, that has just came out that effectively does this for you. Do a brief site description, proving ownership for tribal land or trust land. The proof is in the pudding. And then just describe the potential resilience benefits. If you already have a climate adaptation plan, drawing on a lot of that language is really straightforward. Each of these are like 500-word descriptions, so very short, very light lift, and then an engagement plan. This launched November of 2023. And like I said, nothing has come in from Region 8 yet. So, and it's undersubscribed. So they still have a lot of these 50 direct technical assistance grants to give out. They'll run through this fall. Most of the technical assistance they really do want to set up for the first half of this year. The clock's ticking. The projects can start no later than July in order to have time to apply for that community change grant program, right? And then the community change grant program application deadline is November 21st of 2024. Again, I'll send this out. There's a simple little web form that you have to fill out in order to apply for the equitable resilience, the direct technical assistance program. And I direct your questions that you may have. I can try and answer a couple of them, but the this email address here, equitableresilience@epa.gov, is how you can get in touch with Abby and her colleagues to get your questions answered. Does anybody have any brief questions on this program, acknowledging that I am merely I am not part of this program. I'm just trying to communicate it to you all.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in, Kyle, and say
Yes.
There's some interest from folks here. I would really strongly encourage this. And Katie, also, even though this was a plea for Region 8, if you would be willing to announce this also at SWAF next week, I think it would be really helpful. This is a huge chunk of money that came in from the Inflation Reduction Act, and it is a once in a lifetime opportunity for tribes to go after this kind of funding with little overhead, at least to get the technical assistance. And if you get the technical assistance, that's what puts you in running to get these big grants. So I strongly encourage folks to do it. You can reach out to Kyle or me, and we can follow up or help you figure things out. And obviously we'll send out, Vic, if you can send out this short presentation to everybody, and we'll make sure people are more aware of it. Aaron.
I probably should have added April, our first Tuesday stakeholder meeting for NIFA. We are going to be having Department of Energy talk about climate grants, NRCS talk about their climate grants, NIFA talk about their climate grants, and NASA talk about their climate grants. And maybe Kyle, would you want to come on and talk about this opportunity as well? on that day.
I'd be happy to, or getting in touch with Abby Hall.
Directly.
Okay.
I mean, she'd be the better person to do it.
Okay.
But I can get you in touch with her, Erin, if that's all right.
Yeah, that would be great because we're trying to get
Sweet.
everybody in one space with all of these opportunities available to tribal colleges and tribes so that it's people have a little bit easier access.
Yeah, that's
Got it.
great news, Erin. I really encourage EPA getting on because they've got the biggest chunk of money.
Excellent. Thank you.
I put a question
Okay.
in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
That was just, is there a 1 or 2 pager available that's shareable from their website?
There is. The website is great, and I was just trying to. Oh, sorry, everybody. I was just trying to copy this from my presentation. I can't copy it from the presentation easily. I've got to get out of slide. Here we go. I'm going to drop this in real quick
Thank you.
into the chat because that will help. I think that was a link, but apparently not. Hold on. No,
It showed up as
it
one.
wasn't.
It wasn't?
Oh, it did show up as one?
Yeah,
Okay, good.
Yeah,
For
I
some
clicked it.
reason,
yeah. It did.
did it
It's
work
good.
for? Oh, there, I see. Got it. Good. Yeah, I don't know why that picture showed up. That's the best place to go. And Abby did send me a couple other pieces of information that I can share in addition to this presentation. And I think there is a 2-pager in there. All right.
I'll send it out
Perfect.
to the climate hubs as a whole as well.
Fabulous.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah.
That's great.
100 people on our list though. So.
Well, and I saw Danelle was on here too. I mean, she specifically reached out because she was sort of floored that that nobody in Region 8 had put in a request yet. So,
Okay, we'll get this out.
yeah, let's get the word out. Okay, everyone. I'm going to dive right into Western drought update. Before I do, actually, my colleague is trying to send me something right now. I just need to see if he did. We're actually running some numbers on this as we speak. So I might have some more information to share during my presentation that will be live. But here we go. Here's the update. Here's the summary right now. Drought conditions are persisting across the Central Plains, Northern Plains, and the Northern and Southern Rockies. The Central Rockies have seemed to come out of drought conditions at the moment due to those atmospheric rivers that are hitting California and coming across. Really notable, though, is the extreme and exceptional drought, the highest class of drought that's occurring in southern New Mexico. Along the Rio Grande and the Pecos rivers, and we are not expecting that region to get any relief in the coming months. So it's a pretty dire situation in southern New Mexico and down into Texas. The big story this winter, despite the current atmospheric river situation across California and the Central Rockies, has been historically warm winter weather across the Northern Rockies and Upper Midwest. I'll share some maps of that in a little bit. Snowpack is due to that. Snowpack is at record low levels across many parts of the Missouri and Columbia headwaters. We now know that we should expect and be planning for pretty dramatic water supply impacts, especially for irrigation, dryland ag, you name it. In the Missouri River Basin. A winter El Nino has been what we've been experiencing, and it has sort of met some conventional wisdom, at least in the Northern Rockies, but not in the Southern. We've been experiencing a winter El Nino that's one of the strongest in the last couple of decades, but it's expected to rapidly transition to a La Nina by this fall. So we'll go into that too. Here's our current status of the U.S. Drought Monitor, and I just premonitioned much of this. We're seeing drought conditions in the D2, the severe drought conditions up here in the northern Rockies. I actually have gotten a preview of how this map is likely to change this week, where I'm expecting to see some extreme drought, some D3 appearing, especially up here in the crown of the continent. And then a big story right now is what's happening down in New Mexico. Almost 100% of New Mexico is in abnormally dry or worse conditions. And we do see this ribbon of extreme drought and exceptional drought conditions along the Rio Grande and Pecos rivers down in southern New Mexico. And, extreme drought up in northern New Mexico too, around the Jemez and up into the Navajo Nation. So some really dry conditions, somewhat abnormal for an El Nino winter, to have these dry conditions in the lower Colorado basin. And then of course we've had dry and warm conditions across the upper Midwest as well, that are impacting things. Here's my favorite little map showing us how drought has progressed over the last 24 years. I can't believe it's into 2024 right now. But we can see starting in the early parts of 2021 that extreme drought that occurred during the peak of the COVID pandemic, how that migrated to the northern Rockies and then spread out across the West. We've had some relief across some of this region, as you can see here. This last spring, and that series of atmospheric rivers that cut up through California, Nevada, and into the southeastern corner of Montana really provided some relief. Didn't provide relief for northwestern Montana though. And then we've seen drought conditions steadily building back across the northern Rockies and the southern Rockies. I'm going to show you some graphs now, and as I have for the last several of these presentations, I'm going to be showing them to you by hydrologic basin. These are what we call HUC2 basins. They're just the major river basins. The graph that I'm going to be showing you is roughly organized from north to south. So we'll see Pacific Northwest and Missouri on top, then coming across the California Great Basin, Upper Colorado and Arkansas in the middle, and then the lower Colorado, Rio Grande, and Texas Gulf on the bottom. And this is what that progression of drought has looked like since January of 2020. This was the big story over 21 and 2022. But what I really want to point out is that we've been seeing some very dramatic drought conditions in the Rio Grande. The lower Colorado is not coming out of drought, as we were just seeing on the map. And then we just have some persistent dry conditions across the Pacific Northwest and the Missouri River Basin. California and the Great Basin are continuing to look good. If we look at that since 2000, we can see some of the sort of trends and how drought tends to progress across this region. That tends to go from south to north. We see drought events really beginning in the Texas Gulf, Arkansas, so Oklahoma region, the Rio Grande, and then progressing north and west up through the middle latitudes, and then up into the Missouri and Pacific Northwest. We see that trend here in the 2011 to 2015, that big 5-year drought that hit California a little later, but we saw early echoes of it, early warning of it in the South, and then once again we saw during those COVID years. Note that we're starting to see some of that build up here in the 2022 to 2024 area, and this is normal as we transition often up into El Nino conditions. We may expect some of these ripple effects to continue up into the northern basins. So all that is to say, I don't anticipate the Missouri River Basin improving anytime soon. This is the secretarial drought designations for last year. They haven't produced a new map so far for this year, and yet this really shows you the impact of drought this last year. I mean, it was a really extreme year in terms of just the net area of the country that received drought designation. Secretarial, this is the Secretary of Agriculture, drought designations over the last over 2023. These are the counties that may have been eligible for federal drought disaster assistance, such as the livestock forage program, depending on the timing of some of those drought experiences. Since the start of this calendar year, so since January, we've seen some trends in how drought has been changing. These areas in blue and green, these are areas where we've seen improvement in drought conditions. So we had a pretty extreme drought late last summer into the fall across Louisiana and portions of the Deep South. That has, for the most part, has improved quite a bit. Meanwhile, we've actually had degradations. We thought we were coming out of drought up in the Missouri headwaters and the Columbia headwaters, but we've seen degradations across much of Montana. And then areas that are gray have stayed the same. We've been in drought since the beginning of the year across that upper Midwest region, and then across several regions in that southern New Mexico area. And this is why. We are experiencing one of the warmest winters on record across the contiguous US. This is the daily temperature anomaly. So the difference from normal, 1991 to 2020 as the definition of normal, over the last 30 days. And what we can see is that, I mean, the whole middle to northern tier has been in the 3 to 4 degree range or warmer compared to normal over the last 30 days. It's just remarkable. And if we bring it back in time and look at the rest of the winter, we can see that this is the last 90 days, so the last 3 months roughly, that whole northern plains into the upper Midwest and across over into New England was way warmer than normal. What we see here across much of the Intermountain West was also really warmer than normal temperatures, mostly at high elevations. You can see I live right here in Missoula, Montana, and it's colder than normal here. The reason is because we were under high pressure systems and we had what are called temperature inversions. Our valleys filled with cold air, our mountains were warmer than normal. And so we were cold down here in Missoula, but the mountains all around us were much warmer than normal, and which had significant impacts on snowpack. And then since October 1st, what we consider really the beginning of our hydrologic season, so we think of October 1st as when the water year begins, we've seen the same pattern, this exceptionally warm temperatures throughout this entire season. All of us have been experiencing this. This has been a really warm winter. And precipitation hasn't helped some of these areas. Here we've got the precipitation anomaly of the last 30 days. And what we see is that areas like the upper Midwest and the high plains, the most of the Missouri River Basin has seen only half or lower of the amount of precipitation that is usually experienced, or really less than 30% of the amount of precipitation that's usually experienced during this last month. Up here in the Northern Rockies, we see the same thing. This is about where the front range of the Rockies is, right at that line. So we saw more precipitation than normal in Great Falls and going out into the plains. That's not saying much because they don't usually get a lot of precipitation this time of year anyway. This area is Glacier National Park, the crown of the continent, the headwaters for both the Missouri River Basin and the Columbia River Basin, and it has been really dry over the last 30 days. Same going through the spine of the Rocky Mountains. If we go back through the last 90 days, the picture is even worse, where we've seen really, really dry conditions across the high plains in the Northern Rockies. And since October 1st, the story is much the same. Now, coming back here, I do want to point out that this is atmospheric river action right here. This is the big stories that have been made in Southern and Central California, where we've had a couple of these fairly large, including a very large atmospheric river event, dumping rain in the Central Valley and then up into Tahoe. Projections are that we're going to have another one of these this week, later this week, another large atmospheric river event that's really going to impact the Tahoe region. So, so this is just looking at the month of January, because some of you are probably thinking to yourselves, well, what about January? I mean, it was so cold. We hit -25 here without the wind chill here in Missoula, and all across the Midwest and plains, we had really cold weather. Well, that was a short amount of time, unfortunately. It was nice to have a little bit of that cold weather, but it didn't really, for the Northern Plains and the Northern Rockies, this is that same period of time, it didn't really come with a lot of snow. So it may have been colder than normal, but it was also drier than normal. And that doesn't make snow happen. That doesn't make our snowpack sort of improve, unfortunately. And so even though we had a nice cold spell in January, it's done little to improve our fortunes when it comes to what an unusual winter we're having. We'll get into the snowpack situation in a second, but I do want to point out that this all translates into pretty dry conditions, abnormally dry conditions. This is the standardized precipitation and evapotranspiration index. Now, normally in the winter, I wouldn't be showing you this because we don't have a ton of evapotranspiration. The plants aren't transpiring. There's not a ton of evaporation off the landscape, but we're having a warmer winter than normal. So we've actually seen periods where it was 60 degrees out here in the high plains in Montana, 60 degrees in January and early February. We have evaporation happening. So we're having low snowpack and we're having drying out of those soils that has been happening across the high plains because of those abnormally warm temperatures. So let's look at the snow. Now, first, I'm going to show you a series of graphs from the Natural Resource Conservation Service. These are based on SNOTEL stations. SNOTEL stations are snow monitoring stations, and they're only in the mountains. They're generally in the highest parts of the Intermountain West. So when I show you something like this is the average of SNOTEL stations across the Missouri River Basin. I want you to know that this 79% of normal snow is being measured at only, I mean, it's not a handful, it's a lot of stations, but only in the highest elevations. So in a bit, I'm going to show you similar numbers, except integrated across these landscapes. But for now, I want to show you, this is the SNOTEL. So this is high elevation snow. And what we're seeing is across the northern tier in the 70 to 80% range, much lower up here in the upper Midwest. In the middle tier here, the Central Rockies, we're seeing right about normal. And then in the southern Colorado, the lower Colorado River Basin, above normal. But again, this is entirely based, these numbers are entirely based on high elevation snowpack. So we can start seeing that as we get finer and finer in the hydrologic regions that we're looking at. This is the subregions. So this is, for those of you who are into this stuff, Huck 4 regions. And we start seeing some finer definition in these patterns where we're seeing both the impact of some of the atmospheric river events in some higher than normal snowpack across the basin and range region in the Great Basin. You still see that lower than normal snowpack and those higher elevations. And notice that we drop out over here because the HUC regions, the subregions, don't include high elevation snow monitoring sites once you get down to this level. We can see that with the basin. This is the HUC 6s. And we start seeing the Northern Rockies really pop out as low, very low, historically low snowpack. And then finally, this is the subbasin. This is the finest region that the NRCS produces that shows you really these historically low levels of half the amount of snow that we would normally expect for this time of year, 40, 48, 43% in the crown of the continent region. And then the impact
Kyle,
of those
Kyle.
atmospheric river events. Yes.
So there's a question from Clarence. Do you have any of this data for Alaska? Because he's looking for how to understand the drought projections in Alaska.
They do produce some of these data for Alaska. The NRCS does. So I can get you the sort of snow numbers for Alaska, or send you a link, and maybe somebody else can look that up while I'm talking and drop the link in our chat.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Thank you. So that this is sort of the big the regional overview at the finest granularity, where we're seeing those exceptionally dry and low snowpack conditions here in the Northern Rockies, and then the impact of some of these atmospheric river events coming across mid-latitudes. This is why we've had the improvement in drought conditions across the Central Rockies. And then we what we're not seeing is the aridity that's happening down in New Mexico. We can look at this a different way, though, and the graphs that I'm about to show you are calculated not from the SNOTEL sites directly, but from a different product that's created by the National Snow and Ice Data Center that's run by NOAA, called SNODAS, the Snow Data Assimilation System. And what this is a gridded representation of snowpack across the entire basin. So it's saying for every 4-kilometer area across the basin, how much snow, SWE, snow water equivalent, do we expect to have at this time of year? And then where are we at? And quite honestly, the numbers are a lot more dismal. And the reason is because we've had a really warm winter. And we all know that warm winters can really impact our snowpack in the plains. There's no snow in the plains. So right now, the Missouri River Basin, whereas if you just look at those high elevation stations, we were up in the 78, the almost 80% range. When we look at it across the entire Missouri River Basin, what we see is we're actually only at about 48% of our normal snowpack, the normal amount of water that's held on February 20th in this basin. That's in the lowest 5th percentile of years on record since 2003 for the Missouri River Basin. So we are experiencing one of the lowest snowpack years for the Missouri River Basin. The upper Colorado River region, and so I'm showing right here, this is just our reservoir status. I like to include this. There's not huge stories to tell right now in terms of our reservoir status, but the upper Colorado River region is actually at about 90% of its median. It's in the normal range of variability for its year. Started off low, but thanks to some of these atmospheric river events that have come across Southern California, we've really seen some improvement in snowpack approaching normal snow across the upper Colorado River region. The lower Colorado, it's much more flashy because there's a lot of quick events of snowfall and then rapid melt events. And so we've seen a lot of variability, but we're right about normal for this time of year in the lower Colorado River region. And then California, obviously the story has been large atmospheric river events that we had last year, up to 200% of normal snowpack, and then how that impacted the fill level of major water supply reservoirs across California. And we're seeing that happening right now as well, where many of these reservoirs, there's a lot of water on the landscape. I don't need to tell you all, and we're hearing how FEMA is responding to these major mudslides and disasters and flooding that we've been seeing in the news. So water supply in California is looking pretty good. But of course, the story is, how do we continue to get that water down into our groundwater, replenish those aquifers, so that we have that long-term storage of water for agriculture and domestic use. Sorry, I meant this to be up a little higher. This is the current status of the major reservoirs in the Missouri River Basin. Right now we're in sort of normal system capacity across the reservoirs, but this is the projection of where we're expected to be going. So these dashed lines here is normal, is the average system storage. So this is all of the main stem major reservoirs along the Missouri, where they normally would be throughout the year. Normally we have snow melt coming in, filling our reservoirs. They've actually been lowered going into the season in order to accommodate that snowpack and the melt and runoff. And then they slowly let that water out of the reservoirs throughout the rest of the season. This is where we are now. Feels sort of normal in terms of storage, but this dotted line is the forecast put out by the Army Corps of Engineers of where they think that reservoir storage is going to be the rest of the season. They have taken the information from the SNOTEL stations, from SNODAS, what we know about water supply, how much water is being held in the snowpack, and have projected that we're going to be well below normal in terms of our storage capacity going out through this season, due to that low snowpack. So in some ways, their forecast is that we're currently at the high water mark in terms of our storage capacity across the Missouri River, the main stem reservoirs of the Missouri River Basin. This isn't a good thing. And then here's the California region. We're just above normal in terms of our snowpack across the full California region, as derived from that snow data assimilation network. So that's our current snow status. Pretty much the upshot here is that it is really bad here in the Northern Rockies. And people who live up here will tell you that. I can tell you that. My family hasn't gone skiing this year because we've had such historically low snowfall. Our snowpack at most of the SNOTEL stations around where I live are not only at their minimum on record, but they're half of the previous minimum on record in terms of the amount of snow water that's on the ground. It's really bad. And people up here, this is matching the conventional wisdom of an El Nino pattern for the Northern Rockies, where we expect to have a warm, in the Northern Plains and the Columbia River Basin, where we expect to have a warm, drier winter, right? So it's sort of reinforcing what people have been taught to expect. But unfortunately, people have also been taught to expect wetter conditions in the Southern Rockies. And we really, other than a couple of atmospheric rivers that have clipped the northern part of the Southern Rockies, we really haven't seen these extreme wet conditions provide for water in southern New Mexico and across New Mexico. Unfortunately, we're not seeing that southern extent of the Rocky Mountains have the snowpack in the wet winter that people feel like they were promised by an El Nino event. So that's just to say that these patterns are not strong this conventional wisdom about what El Nino means is not a strong pattern, not a consistent pattern. And while we've seen our expectations reinforced in the Northern Rockies, we've not seen them reinforced as strongly in the far Southern Rockies, unfortunately. So this is how, this is El Nino. The red areas here are El Nino events since 2000. The blue areas are La Nina events when the equatorial Pacific is colder than normal. And this is where we've been. We've crept up into the second strongest El Nino event since the year 2000 over the course of this fall and going into where we are now. Projections are that this is sort of peaking at the moment. If we look at just since January 2020, I want to show you, this is the last time I gave an update for you all. This was this last summer, I think in June, and I said, well, here are the projections of where the climate folks at the Climate Prediction Center think that we're going to be going in terms of our El Nino conditions. These were the projections, and this is what actually happened. So bouncing back and forth between those, got it mainly right. They thought we would continue moving into stronger El Nino territory, but this El Nino has been at the top of the climate projections in terms of El Nino events going through this summer and into this winter. So where are they predicting we're going to go next? Well, the prediction is that we're going to peak out in terms of our El Nino conditions. The equatorial Pacific is going to start cooling again. There's some good evidence of that actually down deep in the equatorial Pacific, not the surface, but deeper, it's colder than normal, and that's going to mix up into the higher levels of the water column, and that we're going to very rapidly transition into La Nina conditions. And it's not just any old La Nina conditions. Currently, the projections are that by next fall and winter, we may be in one of the strongest La Ninas on record. We'll see if that happens. But what we do know is that a strong El Nino tends to be followed by a rather precipitous drop into La Nina conditions. We saw it in 2009, 2010. We saw it to a less extent in 2015, 2016, but it was still a precipitous drop straight down into La Nina conditions. And that is the current prediction from the Climate Prediction Office for this current El Nino, La Nina cycle. What does that mean? Well, again, conventional wisdom is that means that we're going to have a colder, wetter winter up here in the Northern Rockies, and that drier conditions will continue, in this case, in the Southern Rockies. But it is not a strong pattern, and I just want to reinforce that it's not a strong pattern. Here's the probabilities. The CPC, the Climate Prediction Center, puts out these graphs just showing the likelihood of being in either El Nino in red, La Nina in blue, or neutral between the two in gray over 3-month periods. This is April, May, June, July, so on and so forth. The upshot here is by this fall, September, October, November, the CPC is, their models suggest an 80% likelihood of us entering into a La Nina condition where the equatorial Pacific is colder than normal. A smaller amount, about a 20% likelihood of being in neutral, and a very unlikely that we would stay in El Nino. So get ready for a La Nina winter next winter. This is just some of those relationships that we see between this series. This is again El Nino and La Nina, El Nino in red, La Nina's in blue, and then the drought conditions and how they've the genesis of drought going up through all of those hydrologic basins And you can see, certainly if you cross your eyes, some relationship between La Niñas sort of kicking off this cycle. And then as we move out into El Nino conditions, we see the drift of that aridity to points north. Here we saw it through this 2021, 22, and 23, what some people called a triple dip La Nina, 3 subsequent winters of La Nina conditions. And it'll be interesting to see what happens as we transition into this current La Nina. All right, let's look quickly at some outlooks before the top of the hour here. This is the CPC's 6 to 10 day temperature outlook. Notice that this is valid for later this week and was issued just yesterday. So really what we're looking at is a little colder and wetter than normal across much of the West. That's nice. Above normal temperatures across much of the East. I'm going to a wedding in Atlanta this next weekend, and it's going to be 70 and sunny. So that will be fun. We look at the 8 to 14 day temperature outlook, much the same. And this is really, we're going to be seeing this an atmospheric river come through California and come up into across the central and northern Rockies. That will be nice to get a little bit of snowfall. Unfortunately, when we look at the monthly outlook, this is for the month of March, what we're seeing is above normal temperatures, below normal precipitation across the northern Rockies. There's a little tip of it here in the Northwest, and the prediction of atmospheric river events, that parade of ARs continuing across the central Rockies. And then down here, critically, below normal temperatures in the Rio Grande region. Our seasonal outlook, this is the 3-month outlook, March through May. Is much the same. It weakens because the expectation is that parade of atmospheric rivers will start to slow down to just equal chances. So likely normal conditions across the central part of our area here, but continuing to be drier and warmer than normal across the Pacific Northwest and Northern Rockies, and below normal precipitation down in southern New Mexico and the Rio Grande region. And then this is getting a bit more speculative. Let me just finish this, Maureen. This is the May, June, July. This is the planting season and the beginning of the growing season for much of us, where the expectation is that we'll see above normal temperatures and below normal precipitation across much of the West. Any questions about that?
Yeah, I was just highlighting the trends in Alaska. Were substantially above normal temperatures, so that's going to contribute to drought conditions and increasing in Alaska as we go into the season.
Although we've seen quite substantial snowfall in portions of southern Alaska in the Aleutians over this winter, and so there's a lot of water in Alaska. The drought outlook. So taking those CPC climate predictions, this is what it means for drought. These maps get produced weekly, and what we see is the likelihood persistence of drought across that Rio Grande, Pecos rivers and up into the Red River area, and persistence of drought in the Northern Rockies. This is valid for February of 2024. We're almost done with February, so let's look at the seasonal drought outlook. I'll get you in a second. Okay. Katie, thank you for raising your hand. I see you there. Our seasonal drought outlook is just for development of drought across the High Line, redevelopment, because all of y'all know we were in drought. We came out of it a bit, and now the expectation is that we're going to see a redevelopment of drought, slight expansion across the Cascades, and then a real expansion of drought conditions across southern Texas and across our southern border along the Rio Grande and Pecos rivers. So the forecast is that it's going to be a real dry spring and summer here across the southern tier. Yes, Katie.
So, thanks for this great presentation. Absolutely so enlightening and really engaging too. It's one of the best presentations I've seen on seasonal outlooks and what we can expect and what's been going on for a long time. So now that bit's over, I have my question is about the precipitation outlets, because we know in the southwest they can be wildly all over the place, and it really needs to be like up in the 60% and over for us to expect to believe it. Is it the same?
Yeah.
Where are these outlets more reliable?
These outlooks are most reliable in these areas that are getting into the darker blue in terms of temperature, or in these areas that are really getting into browns. So like this is getting fairly reliable, but as you can see here, it's still just leaning below. These are the sort of, you can think of them as their confidence in the forecasts. And so nowhere we're seeing on this map, except for down here in southern Georgia and across Florida, are we in this likely range. The CPC has moved towards this sort of, I think, a clearer representation. And what you're really looking for are those darkest colors in terms of the strength of the forecast. So there's a relationship between how far above normal we're expecting or below normal we're expecting, and the confidence as well. And that's just represented by the darker colors. So the leaning, is still more of a toss of the dice, as we see here in Texas, but we haven't seen much evidence of being wrong in terms of these conditions continuing in that Rio Grande Pecos region, those super dry conditions. Did that sort of start answering the question?
It did, yes. I guess the other part to that is, are there geographical locations where we can believe the lighter colors a little more?
That's a good question. I'm certainly believing in the dryness that we're seeing in the Northern Rockies, because I'm seeing it all the time. But I'll be the first to say that that's a confirmation bias that I have at the moment. I would put some credence in these, especially in the month, like this is just for the month of March. I think I would put some credence in this being the pattern that we can expect to see. We've been seeing, for example, persistent blocking high pressure systems that are making it so that we're steering moisture, low pressure systems to the south of the Northern Rockies and the Pacific Northwest. We're seeing this parade of atmospheric rivers, and I think there's good evidence to suggest that that's going to continue through March. And we're seeing sort of not that typical El Nino pattern in the farthest reaches of the Southern Rockies. So I think there's good evidence to suggest that a month out we're doing pretty well, at least at this climatological scale of doing predictions. Once we get into these seasonal outlooks, it certainly becomes it feels like it becomes a bit more speculative.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Here's just a couple of the resources that I've been looking at and that I think are really important as we move into the spring and into our fire seasons. I didn't show fire maps because there aren't really strong predictions in terms of fire activity in February yet, but I want these to be on people's radar. Drought.gov is really a go-to source for a lot of the maps that I've been showing and for current up-to-date drought conditions. Those drought conditions get revised every week. The EPA Air Now Fire and Smoke map is great for looking at air quality in your local area, and is well color-coded so that you know whether where you are is sort of safe for being outdoors. And then I also like to use this. It's a pay service, but it has a really nice smoke forecast map as we move into our fire season. So there's that summary again, and I can take some questions. I apologize for going longer. I know people have had to leave.
No, thank you. This is so important to all of us in this industry, whether you're an educator. Okay, Tracy wants, can you post smoke forecasting map and link?
Oh, sure. Yeah, let me flip back there and we'll get it in there. The smoke forecast is through this Open Snow service. I'll throw that into the links in a second, and we'll send this presentation out. We always post it, so it'll be there too. But the Air Now Fire and Smoke map is really the most useful of these maps, I find, for fire and smoke activity.
Perfect.
Yes.
I have a question, Kyle.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, you've mentioned that the temperature has been a big effect on the drought. And I wondered how much that is for the projections too, because I noticed in my area in Arizona, southern Arizona, it looks like we're going to be getting a lot of rain, and yet we're still projected to have some increase in drought in the next 90 days or so, I think. And I was just wondering how that fits in.
That's right. There's a prediction for actually drought removal over the next month in some of these areas, and yet they're predicting moving back into drought conditions or persistence of drought conditions over 3 months. I'm not 100% sure how that's weighing in down there. Although I would say that, once you start getting into those more arid areas and warmer areas, this being below average in temperature is somewhat less meaningful, right? I mean, I know, like up here, if we were below average temperature right now, it would be too cold for much evaporation to happen, and we would be retaining any snowpack that we had. It's little at this point, but we'd be retaining it. The fact that it's above normal temperatures is just hugely impactful in terms of our water availability and our drought projections. I would say that the temperature forecast down in the Arizona, in the Sonoran Desert, is less impactful at this point of the year, and that what you're really looking at is the impact of below normal precipitation being in the forecast across some of this region. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. I didn't realize our temperature was even lower for the projection, so appreciate that.
Yeah. So this is just for the next month. We see a below normal. Again, this is just leaning below, but below normal projections for the next month down in that area of southern Arizona and southern New Mexico. Yeah, and I mean, if some of these storms track a little more south and actually are able to give a lot of precipitation into the Colorado River Basin, that would be good. But direct precipitation impacts, they would have to really swing, across south of San Francisco peaks.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? I know a bunch of you are having to jump off. We will send this out. This is always on our website. Tracy, everyone's saying thank you, Kyle. This was a great presentation, and we appreciate you. I know you feel like the bearer of bad news, but it's better to be informed.
Always.
Always.
It's always drought somewhere.
I know,
So
right?
I never get to just give this is a peachy. Although last winter it was amazing when we were having all that snow in those atmospheric rivers. This last spring was pretty amazing.
Yeah, completely. Melanie, thanks for joining us. Glad you're here. Everyone, thank you. Yes, always. Okay, so next month, you guys, just for the few of us that are still on, we're featuring the ag economy outlook. So huge, huge to producers as extension educators. I mean, you can, if you want any of your producers to jump on here for this, I mean, we can do that. The link is always on the agenda. And so I'm going to reiterate this in an email, just like this one. It was so important for our producers and our audiences. So I just want to thank Kyle. You're amazing as always. And thank you so much for pulling this together. The amount of data you give us in an hour is like insane. So I think we're just always so lucky to have it. And we'll get the slide deck out and it'll be on also our website. So thank you everyone for joining us. We will see you. Oh yeah, Katie, I'm sorry.
Vicky, I was wondering if I might have the video itself so I can shorten it to just Kyle's presentation and share that through YouTube.
So I don't start recording until he starts.
Yes,
but I can
so
absolutely.
this is all recording now, and we've got
Yep.
questions.
Okay.
dotted
Actually,
throughout.
yeah.
So I just
Let me
wanted to make
stop
it
that.
a